1945. German female prisoners of war were told by their American captors, "You are free to leave," but instead of fleeing, they broke down in tears and begged to stay. These women had been taught that Americans were barbaric monsters who would torture them. Yet within weeks of captivity, they refused repatriation to their homeland. What did they discover inside those POW camps that made freedom in a defeated Germany less desirable than remaining prisoners of the enemy? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Spring 1945. The air smelled like smoke and fear. In a small town near the Rhine River, 23 young German women huddled together in the basement of a bombed-out schoolhouse. They wore the gray-blue uniforms of the Wehrmacht Auxiliary Corps. Their job had been simple: operate telephone switchboards, send radio messages, type reports for German officers. Now the war was ending, and they knew what that meant. For 6 years, every newspaper, every radio broadcast, every speech had told them the same story. The Americans were coming, and they were monsters. The propaganda posters showed American soldiers with devil horns and sharp teeth. The films in the cinema depicted them burning villages and hurting women. Teachers in school said the Americans wanted to destroy Germany completely. The girls believed every word, because why would their own leaders lie to them? These women came from good families. Their fathers had been shopkeepers, teachers, factory managers, and clerks. Before the war, they attended school dances and church on Sundays. They learned to cook from their mothers and dreamed of marriage and children. Then came the draft notices. Germany needed everyone to fight. The men went to the front lines with guns. The women went to military bases with typewriters and headsets. They considered it an honor to serve, but by 1945, honor meant nothing. The cities were piles of broken stone. Every night, bombers flew overhead and dropped fire from the sky. Food became so scarce that a single potato was a treasure. Bread was made from sawdust mixed with a little flour. Butter had not been seen in months. Soap was a distant memory. The women washed their hair with cold water and nothing else. Their uniforms hung loose on their shrinking bodies. They had not eaten a real meal in 4 days when the American tanks rolled into their town. The rumbling sound made the ground shake. The building walls trembled. One girl, just 19 years old, started crying. Another held her hand and whispered a prayer. They all knew what happened to women when armies captured towns. Their commanders had told them stories designed to make them fight to the last breath. Stories of terrible violence. Stories that made death seem better than surrender. The sound of boots on the stairs froze their blood. Heavy footsteps, getting closer. American voices speaking words they could not understand. The door burst open. Sunlight poured into the dark basement. The women raised their hands above their heads and waited for the end. But the American soldiers did not shoot. They did not shout. A young corporal, maybe 25 years old, looked at them with tired eyes. He said something in English. None of them understood. He tried again in broken German. "You come, now safe." His accent was terrible, but the meaning was clear enough. They were prisoners. Rough hands searched them for weapons, but found only photographs of families and a few letters from home. The soldiers led them outside into the bright spring morning. The town was destroyed. Every building had holes in the walls or no roof at all. Bodies lay in the streets, covered with blankets. The smell was awful. But the American soldiers gave each woman a canteen of water. Real, clean water. They drank it so fast they choked. Trucks arrived to take them away. The women climbed into the back, packed together like cattle, bouncing over roads filled with holes from bombs. They rode for hours without knowing where they were going. Some whispered that they were being taken to execution sites. Others said they would be sent to work camps in Siberia. One woman said she heard the Americans fed their prisoners to dogs. Nobody knew what was true anymore. Everything they thought they knew about the world was coming apart. The truck stopped at a checkpoint near the French border. Guards with rifles checked papers and waved them through. Through the gaps in the canvas cover, the women caught glimpses of the countryside. France looked different than Germany. The fields were green. The farms still had animals. The villages had houses with glass in the windows. How was this possible? France had been part of the war too, but it looked like a different planet compared to the wasteland they left behind. When the trucks finally stopped, it was evening. They arrived at a camp surrounded by wire fences. Guard towers stood at each corner. Rows of wooden barracks stretched across a muddy field. This was it. This was where they would die, or worse. The women held onto each other as the guards marched them through the gates. The gates clanged shut behind them with a sound like a coffin closing. But then something strange happened. An American woman in uniform approached them. She was older, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a stern mouth. She spoke to them in perfect German. "You will be processed and assigned to barracks. You will receive clothing, bedding, and a meal. You will follow all camp rules. You will not be harmed." The women stared at her in confusion. A meal? Bedding? This had to be a trick. They were led to a building where other women in uniform checked their names on lists. Each prisoner received a number and a tag to wear around her neck. Then came the real shock. They were taken to a shower room with hot water. Actual hot water that steamed in the cold air. Bars of white soap sat on shelves. Real soap that smelled like flowers. The women had not felt hot water or real soap in so long that some of them cried while they washed. After the showers, they received new clothes. Not fancy, just simple gray dresses and undergarments, but they were clean and had no holes. Then they were led to a dining hall. The smell hit them before they entered. Cooked food. Meat, vegetables, and bread. Their stomachs cramped with hunger. On long tables sat bowls of stew, thick with beef and potatoes and carrots. Fresh white bread with butter. Cups of real coffee with sugar and milk. The women stood frozen in the doorway, unable to believe their eyes. An American guard waved them forward. "Eat," he said simply in German. They sat down slowly, afraid this was some kind of test or punishment. But when no one stopped them, they began to eat. And for the first time in years, their hunger was satisfied. The first week felt like living in a dream that might end at any moment. Every morning, the women woke up expecting the kindness to stop, expecting the real punishment to begin. But every morning brought the same impossible routine. Breakfast arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. Oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins. Toast with jam. Eggs, sometimes scrambled, sometimes fried. Coffee that was hot and strong and plentiful. Back home in Germany, this much food would feed a family for 3 days. Here, it was just breakfast. One meal. The first meal. The woman named Greta kept a secret diary hidden under her mattress. She was 22 years old and had worked as a telephone operator for the Wehrmacht. Her handwriting was small and careful as she wrote each night by the light coming through the barracks window. "Today they gave us meat again," she wrote on the 5th day. "I do not understand. We are the enemy. We lost the war. Why do they feed us better than our own officers fed us when we were winning?" The portions were what shocked them most. At lunch, each woman received a full plate, not a small bowl. Sandwiches made with thick slices of ham or chicken. Soup that had actual vegetables floating in it, not just colored water. Fresh apples or oranges for dessert. Oranges. Most of the women had never tasted an orange in their entire lives. The bright citrus smell filled the dining hall. One girl held the orange up to her nose and breathed in the scent for a full minute before she could bring herself to peel it. Dinner was even more. Unbelievable. Pork chops with gravy. Mashed potatoes made with real butter and milk. Green beans cooked with bits of bacon. Dinner rolls so soft and white they seemed like cake. The American guards ate the same food at tables nearby. There was no special officer food and prisoner food. Everyone ate the same meals. This confused the German women deeply. In their military, officers ate meat while enlisted soldiers ate turnips. Here, a private ate the same food as a captain. But the most disturbing moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week. Greta was walking past the kitchen on her way to the laundry room when she saw something that made her stop and stare. Behind the kitchen building, 2 American soldiers were scraping plates into a large trash bin. Leftover food. Uneaten portions. Half a sandwich. A whole pork chop with just 1 bite taken out of it. Potatoes. Bread. All of it dumped into the garbage. Greta felt dizzy. Her mind could not make sense of what her eyes were seeing. In Germany, people fought over potato peels. Children dug through rubble looking for scraps. Her own mother had died the previous winter, and the doctor said it was pneumonia. But Greta knew the truth. Her mother had given her own food to her younger children and slowly starved. And here, the Americans threw away more food in one afternoon than Greta's entire village had eaten in a month. She rushed back to the barracks and told the others. At first, they did not believe her. So that evening, 6 of them walked past the kitchen at dinner time and looked. The trash bins were overflowing. Bread, meat, fruit. One woman made a sound like a wounded animal and had to sit down on the ground. Another started laughing, a high, strange laugh that sounded close to madness. How, she kept saying. How can they waste this much? How can they have this much to waste? The question haunted all of them. If America had so much food they threw it away, how had Germany ever thought they could win a war against such a country? The propaganda had told them America was weak and soft and would crumble easily. But a weak country does not throw away food. A soft country does not have so much that waste means nothing. The abundance was not just food. Every week, clean sheets appeared on their beds. Fresh towels hung in the washrooms. The showers had hot water every single day, not just once a week. Soap was unlimited. When a bar got small, you simply asked for a new one and received it. No questions, no rationing cards, no waiting in line for hours. Just ask and receive. In the 3rd week, they were taken to the camp store. It was called a canteen, and prisoners could buy things with the small amount of money they earned from work duties. The women walked into the building and stopped as if they had hit a wall. The shelves were full. Chocolate bars in bright wrappers stacked in rows. Cigarettes in cartons. Toothpaste and toothbrushes. Writing paper and pencils. Small bottles of perfume. Magazines with colored photographs on the covers. Chewing gum in dozens of flavors. A young woman named Anna picked up a chocolate bar and turned it over in her hands. The wrapper was shiny and undamaged. The chocolate inside was whole, not broken into tiny pieces to make it last longer. The price was 10 cents in camp money. 10 cents. She had earned 50 cents that week from helping in the kitchen. She could buy 5 chocolate bars if she wanted. 5. The number seemed impossible. She bought one, then sat on her bunk and ate it slowly, trying to make it last, but it was gone in minutes. The sweetness made her teeth ache. She had forgotten what real chocolate tasted like. But the most shocking day came in early June. A truck arrived at the camp on a hot afternoon. The women were outside, hanging laundry on clotheslines, when they heard excited voices from the guards. The truck was red and white with words painted on the side in English. Someone said it was a Coca-Cola truck. The driver opened the back and started unloading crates of glass bottles filled with dark brown liquid and ice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The guards gathered around, laughing and talking. One of them waved the German women over. Through a translator, he said they could each have a bottle. Free, no cost. Just take one. The women approached slowly, unsure if this was some kind of test. But the American soldiers just smiled and handed out the cold bottles. The glass was so cold, it hurt to hold. Drops of water ran down the sides. Greta twisted off the metal cap the way the soldiers showed her. The sound of fizzing bubbles rose from the bottle. She took a small sip. The taste was sweet and strange and burned her tongue in a pleasant way. The bubbles tickled her throat. It was the most amazing thing she had ever tasted. And the Americans had an entire truck full of it. In Germany, even water was sometimes scarce. Here, they had trucks that drove around delivering sweet, cold drinks just for fun. That night, Greta wrote in her diary with shaking hands. "They have so much," she wrote. "So much that they share it with prisoners. With enemies. We were told America was starving, that their people were poor and desperate. But I think we were told lies. I think we were always told lies. If they have this much and still treat us with kindness, what does that say about everything we fought for? What does it say about the Germany we believed in?" The question spread through the barracks like sickness. Every day brought new evidence that the world was not what they had been taught. The American women guards were the most confusing. They wore uniforms and gave orders, but they also smiled and made jokes. They did not hit or scream. When a prisoner did something wrong, the punishment was loss of privileges, not violence. One guard named Betty was only 26 years old, and she told them through the translator that she had chosen to join the military. Chosen, not drafted, not forced, but chosen. And after the war, she would go home and go to college. She would study to become a teacher. Women in America could do that. They could choose their own futures. The German women thought about their own futures. What waited for them back home? Ruined cities. Dead families. A country broken and ashamed. And yet, the Americans kept saying they would send them home soon. Repatriation, they called it. Going back to Germany. But as the weeks passed and the contrast between this place and their homeland grew more clear, a terrible thought began to grow in their minds. A thought that felt like betrayal but also felt like truth. What if going home was the real punishment? What if staying here, even as prisoners, was better than freedom in the ruins of the Reich? November arrived cold and gray. The women had been prisoners for 7 months. 7 months of 3 meals a day, hot showers, clean clothes, and safety. 7 months of slowly understanding that everything they had believed was backwards. Then came the announcement that changed everything. The American commander said the prisoners would celebrate Thanksgiving with the camp staff. Together, at the same tables. The women did not know what Thanksgiving meant. The translator explained it was an American holiday about being grateful and sharing food with others. A holiday about plenty, not about war or conquest or proving strength. Just a day to say thank you for what you have and share it with people around you. The concept felt strange. Germany had holidays about military victories and the glory of the nation. America had a holiday about being thankful on Thanksgiving morning. The dining hall was decorated with orange and yellow paper leaves. The tables were covered with white cloth instead of the usual bare wood. The American cooks had been working since before dawn. The smells coming from the kitchen made the women dizzy with anticipation. Rich meat smells. Sweet pie smells. Bread baking. Spices they could not name. At noon, the doors opened. The German prisoners filed in and sat at tables next to American soldiers and guards. Everyone is together. The camp commander, a serious man with gray hair who rarely smiled, stood at the front of the room. He spoke in English first, then waited while the translator repeated his words in German. "Today we give thanks," he said. "We are grateful the war is over. We are grateful for peace. We are grateful that former enemies can sit together as human beings and share a meal. This is what we fought for. Not to destroy, but to build a world where this is possible. Then the food came. The women had thought they understood American abundance, but they were wrong. Turkey, golden brown and glistening, carved into thick slices. Stuffing made with bread and herbs and sausage. Mashed potatoes in mountains of white fluff. Gravy in boats that steamed. Sweet potatoes with melted brown sugar on top. Cranberry sauce, bright red and tangy. Green beans, corn, dinner rolls with butter. And then the pies. Pumpkin pie with cream on top. Apple pie with cinnamon. Pecan pie was so sweet it made your teeth hurt. Greta sat between Anna and an American guard named Margaret. The plate in front of her held more food than she had seen on one plate in her entire life. She picked up her fork but could not eat. Her hands were shaking. Margaret noticed and spoke in slow, careful German. "It is okay. Eat. There are plenty. There's always plenty." That word, plenty. In German, they had a word for scarcity, for rationing, for making do with less. But plenty? That word had lost all meaning during the war years. Greta took a bite of turkey. The meat was moist and tender, nothing like the tough gray meat she remembered from Germany. She took another bite, then another, and suddenly she was crying. Tears ran down her face and fell onto her plate. She could not stop them. Anna reached over and held her hand. Anna was crying too. Across the table, other women were crying. Not sad crying, but something else. Something that had no name. The breaking of something that had been holding them together for too long. The Americans at the table looked uncomfortable at first, but then Margaret put her hand on Greta's shoulder and said quietly, "I know. I know." After the meal, the commander spoke again. He talked about what Thanksgiving meant to Americans. How the first people who celebrated it were refugees who almost died from hunger and cold. How the native people of the land helped them survive and they shared a feast together. How the holiday was about remembering that we all need help sometimes, and that kindness between different people is what makes us human. As the translator spoke these words, something broke inside Greta's chest. A wall she had built to protect herself from the truth. That night in the barracks, nobody could sleep. The women sat on their bunks and talked in whispers. Anna said what they were all thinking. "We were told they were monsters. We were told they would hurt us and starve us and treat us worse than animals. But they have treated us better than our own country ever did. Better than our own leaders treating us when we were loyal and obedient." "What does that mean?" An older woman named Helga, who was 30 and had worked as a radio operator, spoke up. Her voice was hard and bitter. "It means we were lied to. About everything. About who the enemy was. About what we were fighting for. About what kind of country Germany was. We fought for leaders who let us starve while they ate in palaces. We believed in a Germany that never existed. And they believed in an America that does exist. This America. The one that feeds its enemies and treats prisoners with dignity." Greta opened her diary and wrote by the thin light from the hallway. Her handwriting was different now, stronger and more sure. "Today I learned what power really means. It does not mean making others afraid. It does not mean taking everything for yourself. Real power is having so much that you can give to others, even to people who fought against you. Real power is being strong enough to be kind. We lost the war on the battlefield, but I think we lost it before that. We lost it because we built everything on hate and fear and lies. They built everything on plenty and choice and truth. You cannot defeat plenty with scarcity. You cannot defeat kindness with cruelty. I understand that now." 3 weeks later, the announcement came. Repatriation would begin in January. The women would be sent home to Germany. They would be free. But when the camp commander asked who wanted to be on the first transport ship, nobody raised their hand. He asked again, confused. Still nobody moved. Then Greta stood up. Her voice was clear and steady. "Sir, we want to stay. Please, let us stay." The camp commander stared at Greta in silence. Behind her, the other women nodded their agreement. They wanted to stay. The translator repeated the words in English, thinking perhaps he had made a mistake. But the commander understood. He had seen this before with other prisoners, men who had tasted American life and could not imagine going back to the ruins. He shook his head slowly. His voice was gentle but firm when he spoke. "I'm sorry. The war is over. You must go home. Germany needs its people to rebuild. You cannot stay here forever." Over the next 2 months, the Americans tried to prepare them for return. They showed films of Germany, carefully edited to avoid the worst of the destruction. They talked about the Marshall Plan, about how America would help rebuild Europe. They brought in German civilians who had already gone home and survived. But the women saw through the kindness. They knew what waited for them. The films could not hide the truth completely. Every scene showed buildings with no roofs, streets filled with rubble, people in rags searching through ruins. In March of 1946, Greta and 63 other women boarded a ship at a French port. The American guards who escorted them carried boxes filled with care packages for each prisoner. Canned food, chocolate bars, coffee, powdered milk, soap, cigarettes for trading, and warm blankets. Gifts for the journey and for whatever came after. Margaret, the guard who had sat next to Greta at Thanksgiving, pressed an extra package into her hands. "For your family," she said in broken German. "Tell them not all Americans are monsters." The ship was crowded with over 2,000 German prisoners, both men and women, all going home. The mood was strange and heavy. Some people sang old German songs and talked excitedly about seeing their families. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. Greta stood at the rail and watched France disappear behind them. She thought about the camp, about hot showers and full meals, and Margaret's kind face. She thought about America, a place she had never seen but now understood. A place so rich it could afford to be generous even to its enemies. The voyage took 9 days. The ship provided food, but it was basic. Bread and soup and weak coffee. Not bad, but not what they had grown used to. On the 5th day, Greta opened one of her care packages and shared a chocolate bar with Anna and Helga. They ate it slowly, making it last, knowing this might be the last real chocolate they would taste for years. Maybe forever. They arrived at Hamburg on a cold morning with rain falling like tears. The harbor was a graveyard of broken ships and twisted metal. Cranes stood like dead trees against the gray sky. The women walked down the gangway carrying their small bags of possessions and their precious care packages. German officials checked their papers with tired, hollow eyes. Nobody smiled. Nobody welcomed them home. They were just more mouths to feed in a country that had no food. Greta's family came from a town 60 miles south of Hamburg. She had to take 3 different trains to get there, and the journey took 2 full days because the tracks were damaged and trains ran on irregular schedules. She shared her care package food with other travelers who had nothing. An old man cried when she gave him a can of meat. A mother with 2 small children kissed her hand when she offered them chocolate. By the time Greta reached her town, half her supplies were gone. The train station was a pile of broken bricks. Nothing remained of the building she remembered from her childhood. She walked through streets she no longer recognized. Every 3rd building was destroyed. The ones still standing had no windows, just empty holes that stared like dead eyes. People moved through the ruins like ghosts, thin and gray and silent. Children with old faces dug through rubble, looking for anything useful. A piece of wood, a bent nail, a scrap of cloth, Her family home was still standing, but barely. The roof had a hole covered with canvas. The windows were boarded with scraps of wood. Greta knocked on the door and waited. When her father opened it, she almost did not recognize him. He had aged 20 years in the 2 she had been gone. His hair was white, his face was covered in deep lines, and his body was so thin his clothes hung on him like on a scarecrow. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then her father pulled her inside and held her so tight she could hardly breathe. Her 2 younger sisters appeared from the back room. They were 14 and 16 now, but they looked like small children, their bodies stopped from growing by years of hunger. Her mother was dead. Her father told her this quietly, as if saying it loud would make it more real. Pneumonia, he said, just like Greta had feared. But they both knew the truth. That night, Greta opened her remaining care packages and spread the contents on the table. Her family stared at the items as if they were treasures from a fairy tale. Coffee, real coffee, sugar, canned meat, chocolate, soap. Her sisters touched each item gently, afraid it might disappear. Her father picked up a bar of soap and held it to his nose. "Where did you get these things?" he asked. Greta told them about the camp. About the food, the showers, the Thanksgiving feast, the kindness of the guards. About how the Americans had more than they needed and shared it freely. As she spoke, she watched her father's face change. First disbelief, then confusion, then something that looked like anger. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "They did this to us. The Americans. They bombed our cities. They destroyed our country. And you tell me they treated you well?" Greta had expected this. She chose her words carefully. "The Americans did not start the war, Papa. The Americans did not build the camps where millions died. The Americans did not lie to us about everything. Our leaders did that. Our leaders destroyed Germany, not the Americans. I saw what real strength looks like, and it does not look like what we had here. It looks like having so much you can afford to be kind." Her father turned away. The conversation was over. But Greta saw her sisters looking at the care packages with new understanding in their eyes. They were young enough to learn. Maybe that was enough. The next weeks were the hardest of Greta's life. Harder than the war, harder than capture, harder than anything. She had to relearn how to live with constant hunger. How to stretch a single potato into 3 meals. How to ignore the cold because there was no fuel for heat. How to wear the same clothes for weeks because water for washing was precious. How to stand in line for hours hoping the ration office might have a little flour or a few ounces of fat. But the worst part was not the physical hardship. The worst part was knowing it did not have to be this way. In America, people had plenty. They threw away more food than her whole town had to eat. They wasted soap and water and electricity without thinking. And they had won the war not because they were crueler or more willing to sacrifice, but because they had built a country where there was enough for everyone, where people could choose their own paths, where power came from abundance, not scarcity. Greta found work at a makeshift school, teaching children who had missed years of education. Many of them had never known anything but war and hunger. They asked her about being a prisoner, expecting stories of torture and suffering. Instead, she told them about hot showers and chocolate bars and Thanksgiving dinner. She told them about American guards who treated prisoners with respect. She told them about a country so confident in its own strength that it could afford to be generous. Some of the older teachers did not like this. They muttered that Greta had been brainwashed, that she was a traitor for saying good things about the enemy. But the children listened with wide eyes. They asked questions. How did America get so much food? Why did they share it with prisoners? What made them different from Germany? Greta did not have all the answers, but she told them what she had learned. That countries built on lies and fear eventually destroy themselves. That real power does not come from making others weak, but from making yourself strong. That the strongest nations are those that can turn enemies into friends. Not through force, but through the simple act of treating people as human beings. In 1950, Greta married a schoolteacher named Ernst who had lost a leg in the war. They had 3 children together. She kept her diary from the camp hidden in a locked box. Sometimes late at night, she would take it out and read her own words from those months of captivity. The words of a young woman discovering that everything she believed was wrong. The words of someone learning what freedom really meant by being a prisoner. In 1958, when the German economy had finally recovered, Greta and Ernst took their children on a trip to America. They visited Margaret, the guard from the camp, who now taught elementary school in Ohio. Margaret's house was small and ordinary, but to Greta, it seemed like a palace. A refrigerator full of food, hot water from every tap, a car in the garage, children playing safely in the street. This was what ordinary life looked like in America. Not wealth, just normal life. And it was more than most Germans still had after 13 years of peace. The 2 women sat in Margaret's kitchen drinking coffee and watching their children play together in the backyard. They talked about the camp, about the war, about what had changed and what had stayed the same. Margaret asked if Greta ever regretted going home. Greta thought for a long time before answering. "I had to come home," she finally said. Germany needed people to rebuild, to teach the next generation, to make sure the lies that destroyed us never take root again. But I have never forgotten what I learned in that camp. I learned that the world I believed in was a lie. I learned that strength without kindness is just cruelty. I learned that a country that cannot feed its own people has no right to conquer others. And I learned that the strongest nations are those that treat even their enemies with dignity. She paused and looked out the window at the children playing. Her son was laughing at something Margaret's daughter had said. Former enemies, now friends, because their mothers had learned that people are just people, no matter which side they were born on. In captivity, I was freer than I had ever been under the swastika, Greta continued. The Americans defeated us with bombs and tanks, but they conquered us with kindness and abundance. They showed us that true power does not fear generosity, that the strongest nations are those that can afford to be merciful. We were told America was weak and decadent. Instead, I found a country so strong it could turn enemies into friends. Not through force, but through the simple act of treating us as human beings. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Greta's hand. No words were needed. They both understood. The war had taught them that the true measure of a nation is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats its enemies. And that lesson, learned in a prison camp in France in 1945, was worth more than any victory on any battlefield. Greta lived to be 87 years old. She never stopped telling her story to anyone who would listen. To her children, her grandchildren, her students, and anyone who asked about the war. She wanted them to understand that propaganda can make you believe anything. That leaders who promise glory but deliver only suffering are not worth following. That the strongest nations are built on abundance and freedom, not scarcity and fear. And that sometimes, the people who defeat you can teach you more about strength than the people who led you to ruin. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.